who founded underground darkness in the Western Kingdoms, the Necromancer Zayl journeys to Westmarch to restore the balance.
And they displaced across paths with Lady Celine and Sarda, the last hire to the ancient house who seeks the Necromancer to help refuge with their late husband.
I have returned. But as they summoned Lord Sarda, spirit in the moldering crypts beneath the family estate, Zayl and Celine stumble upon something unexpected. A sinister plot to unleash the demon Astrogha and his minions on the sanctuary.
While Celine and Zayl become entangled in a web of alliances and intrigues that embroil both the nobility and Celine's bloodline,
Astrogha's allies work to prepare a horrific ritual to ensure his coming. The key to his return, the memory of the spider, is the heart of the demanding evil in Westmarch, who wields the malevolent artifact. And so what
Previously from the moon of the spider.
If Astrogha desired Zayl's body, Charybdis would grant him that for a time. In truth, no one knew a Rothmanian's strengths and weaknesses better than one of their own, and that fact worked to Charybdis' advantage. He had to act fast, invisible to the mortal eye, with the exception of a skilled spellcaster such as himself, was the work that the demon now did in preparation to taking Zayl. However, the demon was finding Zayl's resistance much greater than expected. Charybdis concentrated. Besides, he would not need long to finish his work. He withdrew from his belt the ivory dagger taken from Zayl. Key to his plans. Another variation of the life tap would ensure that, when the time came, the spider demon would find his superior body even more fragile than the one for which he had abandoned it.
Come to my will, Lord Zayl, and you will become a god.
I will become nothing, the Necromancer returned. Take what you must, but I will not give it to you. Themselves that were beguiling, for they were basic and blunt. However, woven into each syllable was another form of magic, a subtle one that burrowed into the unsuspecting mind the way a worm burrowed through a rotting corpse. Merely listening to Astrogha allowed that magic to penetrate one's thoughts, unless that one was skilled in deflecting such tricks as Zayl was. Yet again, even he had his limits, and they were approaching faster than the Rothmanian desired. But other than continue to pray for death rather than possession, Zayl could think of nothing to do. There was no one there who could help him, either for there was only Humbert, who lacked even a full skeleton, much less mobility. If he was to perish, though, Zayl took comfort in one thing. He had sent Celine back to the city. She would escape from there. At least, if he had failed in everything else, he had not failed in that. Surely, she was safe. No one had seen Alec-Mathias. There had been a message sent much earlier, when capturing Zayl had been the only concern of the evening, that had said the commander intended to take a patrol and follow up a hunch beyond the city walls. Torian had resigned himself to the fact that the man he had once assumed would be his successor had likely perished out there, fighting to the last against the eight-legged fiends. To the north, and heading toward Torian, was a helmed figure that looked much like the missing Alec-Mathias. The wary commander grinned. He started toward the captain. Alec, his expression dour, slowly saluted the older fighter. In his other hand, the adjutant held a well-used blade.
Alec, lad,
called Torian, forgetting military protocol. He was too happy to see his aide. With no sons of his own, he had secretly considered the captain the equivalent of one.
Where in the blazes have you been? Are you alright?
There was a silence. Then the approaching figure responded,
Yes, I am alright.
His voice had a monotone quality to it that did not surprise Torion. All the soldiers were exhausted, and Alec looked as if he had been dragged through the streets.
Well, I'm glad to see you, lad.
The general glanced back at where the men were moving the barrels. Out of the corner of his eye, Torion noticed the adjutant reaching toward him in an attempt to wrest away his helmet. Reflexes honed on the battlefield still barely enabled the older officer to prevent the helmet from being torn free. Torion stared aghast at the captain, refusing at first to believe the obvious. But all he had to do was look closer at the way Alec's own helmet hung to see that it sat just a little too high. Perhaps you would have noticed it sooner on anyone else than on Captain Matthias. Denial, a powerful force. But soon, there was no denying that what stood before him was no longer his trusted aide. As General Torion drew his sword, the captain thrust. Torion let out a grunt of pain as the tip of the blade cut across the side of his neck, just missing the vein. He deflected the next attack, noting with concern that the figure before him fought more and more with a style he recognized akin to Alec's. Well aware of how skilled his adjutant was, Torion pressed harder. Finding an opening, the veteran commander lunged. His aim was true. The sword cut right through the captain's unprotected throat. A thick, half-congealed mass that had to be blood dripped out of the horrific wound. But Torion's adversary did not even slow. Swearing, the general stumbled back just in time to avoid a swing to his head. One part of him registered the fact that his opponent was still seeking to strike off his helmet, while another part wondered just how to defeat something already dead. The spider atop Alec Matthias' body clearly had more control than most. Gritting his teeth, Torion lunged again, and this time, like Alec, he attacked not the body, but the helmet. Even alive, Captain Matthias had not quite been General's equal, and Torion succeeded where his possessed adjutant had not. The edge of his blade caught the helmet's edge. With one twist, it tumbled off, cluttering onto the street.
By Rackus!
Growled Torion as he stared at his true foe. The spider hissed, and Alec's body reacted with a furious series of cuts and slashes against the commander. For a moment, Torion was put on the defensive. His strength began to flag. No, I will not let this happen. He stared into the face of the man he had considered both his successor and his son, and, with a prayer for Alec's soul, thrust. His blade cut the spider in half. A foul, greenish goo spilled out of the monster. The captain's expression contorted. His body went through a series of grotesque spasms. Then, at last, Alec Matthias struck limply to the street. His sword still lay tightly gripped in his hand. Struggling for air, General Torion gazed at the corpse. This one, more than any other, affected him personally. He looked over his shoulder to where the other soldiers and several able civilians were valiantly struggling to hold back the tide of evil. And although he had won his own battle, the commander of Westmarch saw that, unless some miracle happened, defenders would be able to do no more than hold. They were merely mortal, while the spiders kept coming and coming and coming. It was all up to Zayl then, General Torion realized. All up to the man he had tried to hunt down. All up to the Necromancer. And Torion suddenly thought, Celine.
You delay the inevitable,
Hissed Astrogha in his mind.
We will be one.
Zayl felt his will weakening. He knew the demon felt it too.
And when we are one, I will give you the pleasure of slowly slaying the Grey One who thinks me so foolish.
He meant Caribitis. So, Astrogha was not so blind. He knew that Caribitis was still a Rothmanian and, therefore, a threat. But did the demon realize just how cunning Caribitis was? Zayl was not so certain. Either way, the mortal plane would suffer. Then, the spider did something that shook Zayl. Even though it still fought a mental duel with the Rothmanian, it also began spitting from its mouth a horrific, sticky substance.
Webbing.
Of sorts. True spiders did not spin their webs so, but Astrogha's form was a resemblance, nothing more. The demon continued spitting, the magical webbing wrapping itself around Zayl's feet, his legs, then the rest of him. Astrogha was preparing for the moment when his host would finally give in to him. The demon desired his true hellish form, and from Zayl's body he would recreate it, and there was nothing that the captive necromancer could do about it. Caribitis watched the spinning with detachment. The full cycle of this rare lunar convergence had little time left to it, but Astrogha clearly would complete this transformation before then. The armored necromancer secreted Zayl's blade in his belt again. Everything was prepared. Astrogha would be permitted his brief return to the mortal plane, accomplished what was necessary for the balance. I think Caribitis would send the arachnid back to hell forever. There was a fine line. Each event, such as unleashing the demon in Westmarch, could be allowed to proceed only so far. One could not let matters get out of hand. Not that he ever let them. After that, it would be time to move on elsewhere to determine what next had to be done. Caribitis suspected that he had much work ahead of him before the balance would truly be even. There had been too many generations of Rothmanians simply fighting evil. Likely, it would take him another 100 years to set things straight. But he was Caribitis, and so he knew that he would accomplish it, no matter what sacrifices, such as Zayl, Lord Jitan, and the innocents in Westmarch, had to be made along the way. The Night Howler had carried Celine through the forest at a dizzying pace, the furred giant able to avoid tree limbs and ravines with utter ease, even with the human cradled in his arms. When the forest had given way to the high hills, he had proven just as capable, scurrying up rock and avoiding several of Aldric's monstrous servants, whose location the beast seemed to know in advance. Celine could still make no sense of the vision that she had experienced prior to the Night Howler's startling return. The noble woman could only imagine that her exhaustion, coupled with her risky use of magic, had combined to addle her senses for a moment. Besides, of a far more important concern was finding Zayl before it was too late, which seemed exactly what the forest dweller wanted to. Unable to make sense of his grunts, Celine finally assumed that somehow the Necromancer had communicated with the Night Howler and showed the beast how to find her. That was the only explanation for his being in the right place at the right time. It gave her hope. Not much, but some. But now, as they neared the place where she had almost been sacrificed, Celine's fears magnified. In addition to sighting several of Lord Jitan's mutated servants, there were also about half a dozen men, if one could call them that anymore. They strode around as if sleepwalking, and each wore some odd headpiece. Their expressions, to the extent that she could make them out in the light emanating from within, seemed slack, lifeless. Worst of all, she recognized them as some of Alec Matthias's men, the ones who had followed the captain in pursuit of the Necromancer. And the fact that they were here and clearly under the control of Zayl's adversaries could only make her assume that Zayl himself was now a prisoner. Even Celine could sense the ghastly forces emanating from the ancient ruins, forces which had been free. The Rathmanian would have surely put an end to by now.
He's in there, isn't he?
She whispered to the Night Howler.
They have him, don't they?
The creature's low grunt was unintelligible, but somehow his tone made the noblewoman think that she had guessed correctly. Nothing good could come of Zayl being a prisoner of Jitan and the other Necromancer. Celine determined to rescue him, if nothing else. Somehow, if she managed to free Zayl, surely he would come up with a way to defeat the madman. But the only thing Celine could think of to do was to go charging in the front. The Night Howler had shown her where a tunnel led in through the back, but it was well guarded by the man-spiders and seemed a path less likely to success than the main opening. She would have liked to have gotten a better look at the front entryway, but for some unknown reason, her gargantuan companion would not let her stray any closer. It was as if he sensed something that she did not. Thinking of all she had done with and without the medallion, Celine chose her best options. What she would do upon entering was clear. Reaching that point was another matter. If we could only draw them away. But there were far more guards than ever, and when she squinted, Celine thought that she even saw spiders crawling over the hill. So many spiders that she could not believe it. That made her think of what was happening in Westmarch. She suddenly glanced at the Night Howler again, wondering how the two of them had managed to avoid the vast swarm. The vision of the road-winged figure once more came to mind, but it hardly seemed compatible with what stood next to her. She shook off such mysteries. The moon of the spider hung high overhead. Celine sensed that it soon would vanish, and when it did, all would be lost.